Dun, 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 dun! Welcome, Roman gladiators, to your training. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, okay. All right. Hello, fantastic people of who love Roman history. Today, we are going to take a short amount of time to learn about Roman gladiators and the gladiatorial arena. So here we go. Dun, 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 dun. I think that's from Jurassic Park. It's not really Roman. Gladiator means swordsman, from the Latin word gladius, meaning sword. A gladius is a sword that typically most gladiators used in battle. We go hide over here. The origin of the first gladiatorial combat is actually still debated by historians. Most say it was an Etruscan event. Others say it started in Campania. But anyway, the first record of gladiatorial fights came from 264 BC, so over 2,000 years ago. And it was during the First Punic War with Carthage. An important Roman soldier, someone higher up in the rankings, a typical general probably, organized 3 gladiatorial fights to honor his dead father. And he was honoring the spirit of his father. And the spirit of someone who had died, or an ancestor, is called a mane. The use of gladiatorial combat as tribute then was called a munus, to honor someone. So the fights originated as a way to honor people who had either died in combat or someone who was just important to you, and you would hold a gladiatorial combat fight to honor that person. A munus might include public performances with music, food, and often also included theater performances that showed the person's life and were a performance talking all about the person who had died, the person you're honoring. A city might organize one to celebrate religious holidays, important past events, large battles or large wars that had been previously fought. And so you're honoring the mane of all the people that had died in the war. And then these large events attracted people from all over the Roman Empire. And people would participate from other countries as well and would come in for the celebration. Later, wealthy patricians and senators and consuls and town leaders realized how popular these games were, and they thought these were great ways to increase their own popularity. So they'd start holding festivals and start holding all these events and these fights for free and inviting the public and saying, hey, come to this festival. The Senator Plebeius is holding this giant festival. Come join us and make sure you vote for him when it's time to vote. So they would hold these events to get the public to really like their politicians, and then they would vote for them later. So these gladiatorial fights originated as a way to honor people, and now we're turning into political morale raisers. The games were becoming extravagant. They were becoming more about the games themselves and making people happy and having some competition to watch and some sporting event to watch and a way to get votes from the public and less about honoring people. So soon, these gladiators were being used in huge public events called a ludi. And these events might include horse racing, athletic contests, horse races, those chariot races we just talked about, athletic contests, feats of strength, mock hunts, and then several days of celebration, entertainment, food, drink, the whole shebang. The demand for gladiators exploded. Now, originally, gladiators were slaves. They were people that had been conquered. Many of them were people from other armies that had been defeated, and instead of killing the other armies, they brought them back as slaves and signed them up for fights as gladiators. They were also people who might have committed crimes, and instead of going to jail, well, you could fight your way out by being a gladiator, and if you survived so many fights, they'd let you go free. But being a gladiator was such a big deal, and so many people came, and suddenly there were people who were fans of gladiators, and gladiators were making money because if you were good and you were strong and you were fast and you were smart, you could make a lot of money because you could win the fights. So suddenly, instead of becoming a punishment, it became something entertaining. And therefore, thousands of freemen started signing up to battle. They were being lured by the fame and the crowds, and they wanted to be famous, especially the lower ranking people, or if they were in the military, in the army. They might not ever have a chance to be a senator. They might never have a chance to be a consul. But they could, using their skills as people from the military, they could go out into the gladiatorial arena and fight with a flourish and fight all fancily, and they would be good and they'd be cheered on and they'd have crowds screaming their name, and they would love that. It was their chance to live like a famous rock star, except they were a gladiator, not a rock star. So, the main two general types of a gladiator. One is the Paegniarius, and that means someone who holds a small shield. And then the Secutarius, someone who has a large shield. Now, if you watched anything about Roman weapons and armor, you know that a scutum is the term for a large shield. But we haven't covered that yet, so we're going to do that next week. And actually, by the time you read this will be this week. So we're coming to the arms and armor and weapons and all that fun stuff next. So you'll be able to make a little bit more sense on all this. So you'll get to see what a scutum looks like. You'll get to see what a gladius looks like, all those fun things. So two main types. Now, I will add, as we continue on, I'm going to explain to you the different types of gladiators and what they did. And yes, all of these drawings are Mr. Cawley's drawings. And yes, they are also all attached in a file in this folder, so you can happily print them out and color them and make your own gladiatorial army. Because, yeah, if you do that and you make your own gladiatorial army, send me a picture. I want a picture of your gladiatorial army. Seriously. All right, so moving on to the types of gladiators. We've got the Samnites. They used the gladius, which was the short sword. They were heavily armored. And when I say heavily armored, I mean they have a helmet, and they have a scutum. It's a big shield. And they have an ochria, or a leg greave. That leg greave comes from the hip all the way down to their ankle. And that's heavily armored. So their chest is bare, their arms are bare, their other leg is bare. That's what they got. Heavily armored. Now, keep in mind, gladiatorial fights, although many are depicted as very ruthless, violent games, where it was, where it was, one against another person, and it was a fight to the death. It wasn't always a fight to the death, because there we go. Because gladiators actually were very expensive to train. You had to go to a gladiator school. and you had people who were training you, and you had to stay at this gladiator school, and it was like there was a room that you got to stay in, and they fed you and they trained you and they gave you all your weapons, and it was expensive to house you and train you and get you ready for fights. So the gladiator training schools really didn't want to just kill off every single person, because it took a lot of time to train them. Because of this, many times during battles, one person would give a sign that they were done, or one person would get, they would fight until someone was wounded at least a little bit, and then they would call the fight, because maybe that person would have a chance to heal and recover and get better. A lot of times, not so much, but it was rarely a fight to the death, because gladiators were expensive. It's like they were famous football players going at it in the arena, and you don't want to kill off the other team because, well, it costs them millions and millions of dollars to train the other team. You can't just pull in new guys and keep spending millions and millions of dollars on training another team. So, as gruesome as Gladiator sounded, there wasn't a lot of fight to the death. Now, that whole, thumbs up, thumbs down thing, well, that gets even more interesting. So there was a rumor going around that, and lots of pictures, that gladiators would fight, one would fall down, and another gladiator would wait for the answer from the crowd to see whether or not he should, kill the person or let him go free. And there were pictures depicting, there's lots of famous paintings where the crowd is thumbs down, and the emperor is, holding his thumbs down in saying that, he should be killed. Well, actually, historians are now figuring out, as just recently, within the last few years, actually, that the thumbs down actually might mean let him live, that it was a yes. So the two hands down or the thumbs down, but that the hands up or a thumbs up meant he's done. The thumbs down was actually viewed as give him a chance to live. It was actually viewed in a positive light. So, got to do some more research on that. Maybe that's something you want to attack as well and look into. So it's very interesting. But yes, there were times when the crowd or the emperor got to decide whether someone lived or died. Now we move on to the Murmillo. They have a cool fish fin on the crest of their helmet, a very cool looking helmet, I might say. Have an oblong shield. They have the manica, which is an arm guard, and that's about it. All gladiators, in case you didn't know, fought barefoot. Yeah, the ground was sand, and they fought barefoot. Yeah, we don't need feet or shoes, but barefoot. Yeah. I think it's fun that their head is completely safe. You can't even see their eyes, but the rest of them is just like, yep, I don't need any armor. I'm good. Just my head. Just save my head. All right, we move on to the Gauls. Now, the Gauls were actually a group of Celtic warriors from Western Europe that eventually were brought into the Roman Empire. Now, when they were right on that border, as Rome was expanding, the Gauls fought with Rome quite a lot. And because of that, Romans, when they took them as slaves or when they battled and they took them prisoner, they many times made the foreigners dress in their native clothing and fight and just to entertain the crowds. So this happened quite a bit. Retiarius, he's another famous gladiator type. Very fast, very speedy. He has a trident and a net. He's incredibly quick. He has a shoulder shield for the arm that he's throwing the net with, but his whole task is to throw the net to catch you off guard, yank the net back, and hopefully the net catches on your sword or your shield pulls it down, and then he can stab at you with his trident. But he has to move fast. He has no shield to protect himself. Sagittarius, these fantastic warriors were mainly used when there were group battles going on. He would be an archer, and his bows or his arrows would be used to attack from afar, or he might be riding in a chariot at the time as well. The Secutor, or pursuer, very famous gladiator type. Their job, their only job is to chase the Retiarius gladiators, the ones with the nets. Their job is to run around and try to stab at the guys with the nets. Now, he had a rounded helmet which wouldn't catch on the nets, but there were only very, very, very small eye holes. And that was to protect from getting stabbed in the face with the trident. But because of this, breathing was a problem. They would have to train and build up their cardio so that they could handle being in what basically was like an iron, it's an iron mask, but it's like an iron Ziploc bag around your head. There's just no air coming in or out except for these little tiny eye holes. So you had to work to control your breathing, but yet you needed to run very quickly to take out the guys with the tridents. The Thracians had a very cool helmet with a griffin on the top. They had a sika, which was a Thracian curved sword. The curved sword was fantastic because with the curved sword, you could take it, rope it around a shield, and bend that shield back to expose the other person you were fighting against. These warriors were replaced to the Gauls when the Gauls finally made peace with Rome. So we talked about the Gaul warriors a little earlier. When the Gauls finally made peace with Rome, once they made peace, you can't just throw them into the gladiator pits anymore. So they had to throw someone else. They threw the Thracians because they were still at war with the Thracians at the time. Cestus, this is a guy I do not envy at all. He was a fist fighter. He had no armor. He just had spiked gloves and his fists. Very, very strong. I don't envy him at all. Armor, man. Armor, something. Dimachaerus had 2 swords, no shield. Much like they'd call Florentine in the French. In French, Florentine is the use of 2 swords, and you're going at things with 2 swords. Desiderius had 1 or 2 gladiators driving a chariot at high speeds. So imagine there's a fight going on in the middle, and then you have a chariot with a horse running around trying to run you over, and a guy in the back of the chariot either aiming his bow and arrow at you or a spear. The only way to take them out, take out their wheels. Those guys are having way too much fun. The Hoplomachus, this guy had way more protection than anyone else. He, although had a sword hiding behind his small shield, he had a spear as well. So he'd throw his spear when he was at farther distance, and then he'd run in with his spear for close combat. Had the arm guard, had leg guards, had the shin guards, had a fantastic helmet, and very well protected. The Aquarius, very much like a Retiarius, except he has a lasso instead of a net. He also has a dagger with him for close combat. So spear, a dagger, and a rope. The Provocator. This is a gladiator who's been around for a while because he's able to afford his own chest armor, his legionnaire armor. He would have been a strong fighter and someone who either was in the military and had his own protection, or someone who's been in the gladiator ring for a while and could afford to pay for armor for himself. This is a gladiator who's also much more popular with the crowds. He's a little bit higher ranked on the pay scale, and therefore people want to keep him around. He's not someone they're going to look at trying to kill off. He's someone who's probably going to do a lot of killing, or very, 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 very injuring. That's not a sentence. Or injuring a lot of people. He was around in the late Republic and Imperial era, and his armor and what he wore mirrored all the Legionnaire armor. So it was like seeing a bunch of the Legionnaires, the army, in battle. The Velites, they were the skirmishers. They didn't have any close combat weapons. They had some javelins to throw. They'd throw, and run off and go grab their javelins again. Throw. They typically had animal hides over their helmets. They were named after the different Republican army units. So they'd also, if they were fighting, if they had come from the army and had been fighting for one of the armies, they would name themselves after their army units. Now, these weren't necessarily gladiators. These were specifically trained fighters for animals. So although these things would be happening during gladiator events, the bestiarius would not actually be a gladiator per se. They'd be trained specifically in fighting animals. So they'd fight lions, tigers, bears, crocodiles, sometimes all at once. And ladies, oh yeah, women were also gladiators in the gladiatorial arena. Yeah, say what? Gladiatrix were female gladiators. And no, they weren't just slaves or people who had committed crimes. Women were also very fond of being celebrated. And so ladies signed up to be gladiators as well. And ladies, they were quite good. Unfortunately, in the year 200 AD, the emperor at the time decided that women should not be gladiators and that this was a man's sport and prohibited them from joining. But many women still did it in smaller arenas, in kind of the underground. They still did their own fights for their own glory because girls are awesome. Because you can't tell them no. Don't tell them no. Girls can do it too. So sometimes they fought beasts, sometimes they rode chariots. They did it all. And they were tough. So there were some other people that helped out at the games too. First, there was the editor. He was very important. Why? Because he had the money. He was paying for all of this. He was the one who financed everything. So an editor might be a senator, might be a consul. That was just the name given to the financier, is the editor. He would get to stand up and wave to everybody when the game started. The games would be in his honor because he was paying for it. There was the Rudis. He's the referee. Yeah, they had referees. Why? Because, again, the gladiators were worth quite a bit of money. So this wasn't just a bloodbath. This wasn't just guys going out there to hurt each other. There were rules. There were rules of combat. There were rules of who could attack who when. And if things weren't going well or things needed to change or something new needed to happen, the arena referee would step in with his stick, which was also called a Rudis, by the way, and he'd step in and say, nope, you separate, you go over there, you go over there, all right, here we go, 3, 2, 1, try again. Gotta have referees, make sure everything's fair. There was the Retiarius, and he was kind of a big guy. His job was to make sure the gladiators did what they were supposed to do and the animals did what they were supposed to do. And if they didn't, he would help them out and become more interested in doing their job. Typically, that meant having a couple whips in hand and smacking them down and saying, get out there and do your job. this wasn't a huge issue when it came to gladiators who were freemen who were choosing to be there. It happened a lot more when there were slaves or criminals who didn't want to be there. Because, well, if I didn't want to be a gladiator, I would try to run as fast as I could away as well. So his job was to keep everyone in the arena. He was usually a pretty tough guy, sometimes a previous gladiator who had earned his way out of being a gladiator, and now he got to stand and be a bodyguard and go, "You shall not pass." Yeah, something like that, and keep everybody in the arena so the crowd would be happy. Then there was a Lanista. This one seems to look like Nick Fury from the Avengers. And he is the owner and trainer of a group of gladiators, typically a former gladiator who knew all the skills that they needed to know. And his job was to train them all, to house them, to make sure they were taken care of, to make sure they had medical care. And he was kind of like a teacher slash dad slash, principal of a gladiator school. And his job was to make sure that the gladiator schools got all of the gladiator schools were taken care of, and the guys there were getting their trainings, and women were getting their training. And he was the one that the editors would come to and say, "Hey, we need 14 gladiators for this event." And he would say, "I have 14 gladiators I can give you for this event." So he'd be the one who would do all the business workings. And finally, my favorite, the Paegniarius. These were the entertainers who fought between bouts. They entertained the crowds because the crowds were impatient. And when one gladiator event ended, well, you had to take everybody off and set up the new arena for the new event happening. So there was some downtime. So what did they do? They entertained the crowds with jokes, with funny acrobatics, with pretend fights. They were not lethal combatants. Think about if you've been to the rodeo. These were like the rodeo clowns. These kept everybody entertained until the next event happened. Endus Maximus. That is the end of your gladiator training today. Have any questions? Send them my way. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Remember, color those gladiators in. I want to see a gladiator school. That'd be so cool. Send it my way if you do that. All right.